Hey everybody, this video, which is my Sunday sermon from the Bay Area's most recent Maker Faire, is sponsored by KiwiCo. If you're watching this channel and you're not sure what KiwiCo is, stay tuned because it is super relevant to your interests. But right now, let's get into the video.
Good morning. Hello. Oh my God, we're all back here. Hi, everybody. It is so good to see you all. I have some notes. Not about the fair. No, I have some notes to read to you today. It is so lovely to be back at Maker Faire on a Sunday morning giving a sermon. It is, as it has been every single year, my deep honor to address you guys this morning, and I thank you for being here with me. I've actually filmed dozens and dozens of hours of television on Mare Island. Over at, 575 Connolly, I dressed as Indiana Jones. I tested airplane boarding, and I fought zombies. Anybody in the crowd was a zombie for us on Mythbusters? Anybody? I will tell you that when you're in an empty 150-year-old warehouse and a bunch of zombies, even if they're from local towns, are ambling towards you making zombie sounds, it's freaking terrifying. I promote a definition of making that is so broad, it's almost meaningless. I think that making is any time you reach out with your point of view and make something new. You are all makers. Every single person here. And when I started thinking about this talk, I started with an axiom of I wanted to talk about making as self-improvement. And I didn't have any other thoughts than that. And then these 8 pages came out and they're weirdly, deeply personal. So strap in. I'll love you right back. The first thing I want you to know is that I was a lonely kid. I didn't make friends easily, and I didn't know how to act around other kids. I was really lonely. And of course, that's a simplified version of the story, and it doesn't make me unique or special. It's a salient fact. I had this recurring dream when I was a kid, one that repeatedly woke me up petrified. And the specific details of the dream shifted over time, but the feeling was always the same. The feeling was that within the midst of some trauma, I was in the dream both the smallest thing in the room, and I was also the room. I was the smallest thing in the room, and I was also the room. And the feeling left me not of a bifurcation. It didn't leave me feeling separated into two halves. It was more like claustrophobia mixed with vertigo. And I had that dream maybe half a dozen times as a child from like 5 years old. Okay, that being said, my family has a lovely house in a nice vacation spot that's been in my family for 5 generations. I grew up going there for a month every summer. I never wore shoes. I ran around like a wild animal. It was amazing, and also it sucked. I remembered it as an idyllic time. And then later, I realized I had blocked some memories of just how cruel my fellow peers among the 5 generations of families could actually be. Kids can be cruel. I remember a daytime trip when I was about 7 years old, where every kid in the entire area had been invited except for me. And I begged to be invited and I was turned down. And I couldn't figure out why I was so lonely. I knew that whenever I hung around other kids for too long, I would eventually say something stupid and get made fun of. That seemed to happen a lot. I knew that I wished for the kind of camaraderie I saw in television and in movies. But try as I might, I couldn't figure out how to locate it. I only knew I wanted a cessation, an end to this loneliness. And pop music was my best friend at this time. A massive comfort, even though I dare not speak of my preferences to others. Oh no. I had already experienced seemingly innocuous conversations in which I let slip a particular preference and was met with derision for that choice. So I made a note to myself, do not reveal personal preferences. But still, the comfort was real. Pop music, specifically the mainstream hits of the 70s through the 80s, were a primary succor as well as the soundtrack of my developing mind. The music of Stevie Wonder, Wings, ABBA, to Air Supply, Steely Dan to Cyndi Lauper spun musical visions for me of who I wanted to be. My son's joke today that I still have the musical taste of a 14-year-old girl. I spent literal years in my room in Tarrytown, New York, every single weekend listening to Casey Kasem count down the American Top 40 while I built endless things with Legos. I was building spaceports. I was building whole economies of Lego. Spaceports, Death Stars, secret doors, narrative adventures, and also, if I'm going to be honest, I was building a castle moat. I was building a wall. I was building a bulwark. The wall had a purpose, and it was to stand between my loneliness and my conscious self. What I didn't know, in fact, even until recently, was that at the same time I was seeking protection from the outside world by building this wall, in the building I was doing with Legos and papercraft, I was also building my own specific point of view. The constructions and the stories that I was indulging in were absolutely distractions. I was running away from the loneliness. Look, even today, I have processed grief and loss at the very moment it's happening by standing at my workbench and drowning it out. It's glorious. But this is the amazing thing about being a person, is that every one of our coping mechanisms carries with it not just the tragedy that necessitated it, but also a superpower. Small me, self-soothed by concentrating on tiny things carefully, specifically paying endless attention to minute details and getting lost in them and the stories I created around them. I was using that practice to drown out the fact that I didn't know how to have friends, but at the same time, that practice, that iterative process of ideation, creation, and play was building something vital and important in me. My very self was forming around the thoughts and ideas that I couldn't get out of my head. And as my creations improved, so did my confidence and my self-esteem. So while I was running away from one thing, I was in fact running towards something else. Now, what I was running away from was truly a thought, and the most terrifying thought in my head, which is that I was lonely because I deserved to be lonely. This is what a child does with trauma. They take responsibility for it because it's the only path that gives them a measure of control. And this is actually a comfort because it means that something might be able to be done. When I assumed fault, I also assumed the task of finding out why. And what I found at the workbench and what others find in the pen or the guitar or the building or the textiles, what I found at the bench was a measure of mind calming control, at least for the moment, within the act of doing. I found a level of attentiveness that paid dividends I couldn't imagine. And like I said, I was running headlong into something. I was running towards extreme specificity, concentration, attention to detail. This was its own kind of crucible. This furnace of doing shaped me today and showed me what was possible if I paid attention and listened carefully. When I was 27 years old, I was listening carefully, and I realized that I hadn't made sculptures in months, and that was because commercial special effects was feeding all of my creative needs. And then I realized maybe this is what a career feels like. And so I dived in, I leaned in head first. I worked constantly. I worked in commercials during the day and made other models and constructions at night on Deckard's Blade Runner Blaster, on other things I couldn't get out of my head. We all made films on the weekends. I pursued excellence. And in that pursuit, I found my purpose and my skill. I found a discipline that fed me, literally and figuratively, a career that used all the parts of me that I had ever developed up until then. And around that time, a public form of my life arrived in the form of a show called Mythbusters. Thank you.
Welcome back, fellow makers. Thank you for sticking around. Here is more information on this video's sponsor, KiwiCo. KiwiCo creates fun, hands-on activities designed to engage kids of all ages in STEAM. That's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And to help develop problem-solving skills along the way. Designed by experts and tested by kids, KiwiCo's crates contain everything needed to build a project, from kid-friendly instructions to tools all the way to materials. I've built 3 of KiwiCo's crates so far: their ukulele, their tilt and fold desk, and their articulated desk lamp, and I appreciated that everything I needed was in the box. I also love the idea of kids gaining confidence, using their eyes and their hands to make stuff, and to start to see themselves as the makers we know that they are. There are 9 different KiwiCo crate lines, and so there is something for every age and every interest, including babies. As a special offer for viewers of this video, you can go to kiwico.com/tested and receive 50% off your first month of any of KiwiCo's subscription crates. And if you are looking for just a single gift, or you'd like to try KiwiCo's wares before committing, you are in luck, because KiwiCo's store also carries some individual crates, including, I have here, a light-up haunted house, animal bath bombs, and a construction excavator costume. Wait, there's a construction excavator costume? I'm gonna find out more about that while you watch the rest of the video. Thanks.
Nothing was more fun than making that show with that team, and I'm sorry if your kids burned down the garage. And you're welcome. I made television for a long while. I made many a show that I'm proud of with people that I love, and I learned as much in those 16 years of making television as I had in the previous 36 years. I got to experience a ridiculous and staggering array of uncomparable experiences. And then things got really quiet during COVID. And during COVID, I leaned into this new medium with all of my concentration into YouTube. And there I found my discipline anew. And again, the pleasure of the workbench. For decades, my personal work has always occurred on the margins of my professional work, and I treated it as a catch-as-catch-can scarcity model. If I had an extra hour in a day, I would race to the shop, spend 55 minutes doing something, and race to the next thing. When I started spending every day in the shop over COVID, it took months for me to stop treating it with that scarcity model. I was so manic. I didn't have to rush over there every day. There was going to be time. There is time to get stuff done. And YouTube has allowed me to go back into that room with the Legos, listening to pop music. And it's been a long overdue return to an old self with a lot of mileage in between. And lots of people say to me that Tested and the videos we put out got them through COVID, and the truth is that they also got me through COVID. The conversation I feel like I got to and get to have with you guys, the maker community in general, and our patrons specifically, is wide-ranging and infinitely inspiring. My kids are grown now, and there's nothing like adult versions of you. Small kid, there's nothing like your adult children to give you a time machine to your young self, and you really get to, you remember being those ages. And in January of this year, I spent a few weeks in New York City and took some time while I was staying there to reflect upon the version of me that I was when I lived there in the second half of the 80s. I will admit to you, I didn't think very kindly for the longest time on that version of me in New York from 86 to 1990. I was manic, I was self-absorbed, I was exhausting. But I was also making some really nifty things, both by myself and with others. Spending so many weeks in my old city reminded me of endless nights in my Park Slope, 5th floor walk-up, making shit in my apartment, listening to Laurie Anderson, Joan Armatrading, Peter Gabriel. And kids, I know I just cursed there, but there's just something you should know. Is that when adults curse, it is so cool. It's literally, it's like the reward we get for having to pay all those bills. And when children curse, it's really gross to adults. So just don't curse around adults, that's all. I realized that that version of me was laying down some important foundations for future me, and present me is really grateful. And a while ago, I was thinking about that vacation house, and I was thinking about my childhood and the cruelty of kids and why I was lonely. And something dawned on me. A set of facts started to crystallize, and I realized, this is not going to be a shock to any of you, that I was a super hyperactive kid. I was one of those kids. I was that kid your parents made you invite to the birthday party. I was last picked on every team. I didn't have no self-control, but I didn't have much. I was, in fact, to quote Shakespeare, I was much of a muchness. And not knowing how to behave and desperate to be seen, I worked at being seen with a real vengeance. I have many childhood memories of exasperated adults impatiently dressing down my antics and seeing their faces enraged at my pathologies. And I gotta say, since that realization, since I started thinking about that kid and his affect, I realized I had complicated feelings about it. A lot of epiphanies come with, oh, I get it. I see why my mom's that way. This one didn't arrive like that. This arrived with a whole bunch of complicated emotions. It didn't sit well with me that I was that kid. And that bears some interrogation. And I thought, well, okay, I should look at that. Why I didn't like that fact? Well, I had to admit that I'm still angry at that kid. I'm enraged even. And why? Because he was the reason I was lonely. It was his fault. It was him who lacked self-control. He who wanted to be seen so badly that he'd yell and say dumb things. It was him who didn't fully understand the social cues and took jokes too far. And I was the one that learned how to watch how people acted and imitate them. I was the one who ran subroutines over top of normal, regular brain stuff that gave subroutines like, don't ever talk about your music. I am the one at 56 years old today, still so instilled with this innate terror of being alone that I require myself to bifurcate from that kid. And here I was adhering to this bifurcated version of myself. Here is me in the present and there was him in the past. And present me still wanted to be separate from him. This isn't right. I can see how much lovely stuff about that awkward kid brought me to exactly this moment today, and I wouldn't change a goddamn thing. His watchfulness gave me empathy. His love of concentration gave me nearly all of my skills. And that nightmare that I talked about, the feeling that I'm the smallest thing in the room and also the room itself, the feeling from that dream has shown up since my youth, but not in dreams. And it comes around about every couple of years. And it's always arrived at the workbench. Never during a triumph or a tragedy at the workbench. It's always in the middle of a basic vanilla flow state in which everything's sort of crackling along. And when I'm in the right state of mind, that old vertiginous feeling comes that I am the smallest thing in the room. And also the room. And it's not scary, though it is intense. Instead, it feels like a widening of my consciousness about my shop and shop practice in general. That when I'm truly paying attention with all of my faculties, I am both the smallest thing in the room, in that the shop is a microscope pointed directly at whatever I'm working at, and I am the room itself, in that the room itself exists in real life, but also entirely in my head. I know every millimeter of this room. The shop is not just an externalization of my philosophy of working, although it's certainly that. What's also true is that the shop is me and I am the shop. And this ultimately is the abiding lesson of the workbench in my life and of shop practice in general and of life lived like all of our lives are lived, with endless iterations of failures and successes. This is for me the central reason that I make. It's because when I make, and I pay attention to the things that I'm making, I learn important things about myself and about being a better person. And that's why I believe in the end, we all make. When world-famous cellist Pablo Casals was asked at the age of 90 why he still felt it necessary to practice the cello every single day, he said, because I think I'm making real progress. I am a science communicator, and the fact of our sentience that we know is the least explainable thing I can think of. And I think that we make because possessing sentience is far too weird for simple words and conversations. So weird, in fact, we have to invent other modes of communication called like novels and paintings and mud wrestling. We talk about our experience for sure, but we also dance about it, we sew about it, we cosplay about it. We make because being a person and maintaining a self in the chaos of life is requires so much more from us than language and list making. It requires more than following the rules and more than breaking them. It requires zooming out until things get really weird. Out there, you can really see things, and when you do see them and you find that you're driven and must communicate that experience, but because rhetoric is without a doubt the worst possible way to confront the unknown, you cracked out the Legos or the poetry or the guitar or the stained glass and you poured your attention into something until that thing you were making told you what it needed to be and what it wanted to be and what you were supposed to do with it. And then, hopefully, if you listen carefully, if I listen carefully, I can take it those last 10 yards. You brought that creation into the world. And what that thing is, it's you. It's us. It's a piece. It's a reflection. We are looking at reflections of ourselves in the things we make. And it's that simple, and it's not a bug or a feature. It's the nature of groups of people communicating their experience. That's culture. And what is culture but a cavernous hall of mirrors in which we serve up and imbibe every possible version of what we might be and what we might become. Let me ask you this. In your pursuit of getting better at something that you got good at, what was the biggest challenge? Think on this for a second. What was the biggest challenge? Was it the expense? Was it the time? I think if any of us are going to be honest, the biggest obstacle to improvement is always simply ourselves. And that to have gotten excellent at something means that you have confronted all sorts of your own demons, your time management skills, your inertia, your jealousy, your venality, your insecurity, your feeling sorry for yourself, your rage at mistakes. None of it means anything, and it all means everything. We make because when we really pour ourselves into things that we care about, those things we create can sometimes live beyond us. They can change with time just as we do. And they can teach us about ourselves. I'm still learning about my aesthetics from sculptures I made 40 years ago. We make because humans are natural explorers, not just outwardly, but inwardly. And when we truly engage in the discipline of excellence, we've commensurately engaged in a discipline of self-knowledge. I am still working on connecting with that kid, that young version of me. And there will always be work to do, but writing down these thoughts for you has been an important part of that process, and I thank you for your time. Oh, you guys.